The morning that felt different. Walter didn't wake up because of pain. He woke up because something felt off. The room was quiet, just like always. The old ceiling fan spun slowly overhead. The floor creaked under his slippers. But that morning, at 5:17 a.m., he sat up and felt it. A soft flutter in his chest, like a bird trapped under his ribs. Not painful, just wrong. He waited. Maybe it would pass. Maybe he was just tired. At 74, Walter had grown used to the little surprises aging brings: stiff knees, creaky joints, the occasional stumble when the porch light hadn't come on. But this wasn't any of those. He shuffled to the kitchen. Toast. Black coffee. Same as always. But as he reached for the mug, his hand trembled, not from weakness but from something deeper. A quiet fear. Later that morning, his daughter Emily dropped by. She glanced at his face, the color in his cheeks, the way he moved slower than usual. "Dad," she asked gently, "when was the last time you felt like your body was on your side?" He didn't have an answer, and that's how it starts. Not with drama, not with flashing lights or emergency rooms, but with small moments that whisper, something is changing. Cancer doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through the little things. A fever that lingers, a bruise that never goes away, a fatigue that sleep can't fix. And too often, those whispers are ignored because we think, I'm just getting older. Or worse, I don't want to bother anyone. But here's the truth. Your body isn't betraying you. It's talking to you, softly but clearly. Cancer doesn't always scream. It whispers through small changes you might overlook. But small doesn't mean harmless. The good news? You don't need a big overhaul. Just a few smart habits and simple foods can make a real difference. So take a deep breath and let's dive into the 15 early warning signs of cancer you shouldn't ignore. The fever that didn't break and the fire you couldn't see. Linda never thought of herself as a sick person. She was 70, sharp as ever, with a bookshelf full of mystery novels and a reputation at the local senior center for walking laps faster than anyone else. Sure, she had her aches. Her knees crackled a bit. She needed reading glasses now. But illness? That was for other people. So when she started feeling warm at night, just a little sweaty, she ignored it. A flush here, a damp pillow there. Probably hormones. Or maybe a warm blanket. She kicked it off and went back to sleep. But the warmth didn't leave. It came back the next night, and the next. And soon, she started waking up at 3 a.m., sweating through the sheets, heart racing, forehead damp, wondering if she was coming down with something. Only she wasn't coughing. No runny nose, no sore throat, just this strange low-grade heat that kept flickering inside her. Here's what most people don't know. A persistent low-grade fever, especially one that lasts more than 2 weeks, can be one of the first signs of blood-related cancers, particularly leukemia and lymphoma. These fevers aren't like the kind you get with a cold or flu. They don't spike high and break. They come and go quietly in a cycle. You might feel fine during the day, but by evening, the heat returns, sometimes with night sweats, chills, or an odd sense of restlessness. What causes it? The answer lies in your immune system. When cancer affects your bone marrow or lymphatic system, it triggers your body to release cytokines, chemical messengers that cause inflammation and fever. It's like your body knows something's wrong, but doesn't know what it's fighting yet. Linda eventually started tracking her symptoms in a notebook. Morning temperature, night temperature, sleep quality. She noticed a pattern. Her fever hovered around 100.2 degrees Fahrenheit at bedtime, then dropped back to normal by mid-morning. It wasn't enough to sound an alarm, but it was enough to keep her uneasy. At her next doctor's appointment, she brought her notebook. The nurse glanced at the numbers and said, "Let's just run a few blood tests, just in case." That just in case may have saved Linda's life. Her white blood cell count was abnormal. Further testing confirmed early-stage lymphoma. It hadn't spread. It hadn't damaged her organs. Because they caught it early while her body was still whispering. You don't need to panic every time you feel warm, but here's what to watch for. A fever that lingers more than 10 to 14 days. Night sweats that soak your sheets. Fatigue or lightheadedness that seems out of place. Fevers with no obvious source, like an infection or virus. If these symptoms show up, and especially if they come in patterns, Don't explain them away. Your body might not be sick, but it might be trying to tell you something. Today, Linda still walks laps, still reads her novels, but now she also carries a small digital thermometer in her drawer. Not because she's worried, because she's paying attention. And that, more than anything, is what kept her here. Reading one more book, walking one more lap, hugging one more grandchild. The yellow that wasn't sunshine and the shadow behind the mirror. Tom always thought of himself as strong. He was the kind of man who didn't need much: black coffee, a radio that still worked, and his morning walks. So when his wife looked at him one morning and said, "Tom, is it just me or do your eyes look a little yellow?" He laughed it off. "Maybe I need more sleep." But that night, as he brushed his teeth, he looked into the mirror, and she was right. The whites of his eyes weren't white anymore. They had a faint golden tint, almost like someone had painted a thin wash of sunlight across them. He stared a little longer. His skin, too, looked duller than usual. Not sickly, but different. And the next morning, he noticed something else. His urine was dark, like tea. These signs, yellowing of the skin or eyes, known as jaundice, can point to serious issues with the liver, pancreas, or bile ducts. And for older adults, especially those who have no pain or fever, jaundice is often the very first visible sign of something deeper. Here's what happens. Your body breaks down red blood cells constantly, and one of the byproducts is bilirubin. Normally, your liver processes bilirubin and sends it out through bile. But if something is blocking that system, like a tumor on the pancreas or in the liver, bilirubin builds up in your bloodstream. That buildup causes yellowing in the eyes or skin, dark urine, even when you're well hydrated, pale-colored stool, itchy skin, sometimes pain in the upper abdomen. Pancreatic cancer is particularly dangerous because the pancreas sits deep inside the abdomen. That means symptoms don't show up early unless you're paying close attention to things like jaundice. Tom didn't have pain, didn't feel sick, but after a few more days of yellowing, and one especially rough morning where he felt a strange pressure below his ribs, he decided to go in. He didn't like doctors, he didn't like fuss, but he liked uncertainty even less. The CT scan showed a growth pressing against his bile duct. Small, but real. It hadn't spread yet. And because he came in early, his doctors had options: treatment plans, surgical paths, nutritional guidance. There's no shame in noticing. There's no weakness in getting checked. If your eyes are changing color, if your skin has a yellow tint, if you see changes in your urine or bowel movements, don't wait for pain. Pain often comes too late. Today, Tom still walks each morning. Only now, his wife walks with him. And every once in a while, she glances sideways and smiles. "Your eyes are clear today," she says. And they are. Because he listened early, before sunshine turned to shadow. The pain that had no name, but wouldn't leave. Uncle Ray used to say pain was just part of the deal. You hit 75, you earn a few creaks and cracks. He didn't complain. Not when his knees ached in the winter. Not when his back tightened after lifting the birdseed. But this pain, this was different. It sat low in his belly, not sharp, not stabbing, just there, like a pressure he couldn't explain. Sometimes it radiated into his back. Other days it felt like a brick in his pelvis, a weight he hadn't earned. At first he thought it was indigestion. Maybe he was eating too late. So he cut out cheese, switched to decaf, took antacids. Nothing changed. Then he thought, maybe it's the mattress. He flipped it, bought a new one. Still, the ache persisted. That's when he stopped tying his shoes. Not because he didn't want to, but because bending down made him wince. Unexplained, persistent pain, especially when it isn't caused by injury, is a sign that something deeper might be going on. Internal cancers, like those of the prostate, bladder, pancreas, or colon, often begin with dull, nagging pain that feels like pressure, heaviness, or discomfort. The tricky part is, it doesn't feel serious. It's not the kind of pain that sends you rushing to the ER. It's the kind of pain you live with, until one day, you can't anymore. In older adults, this kind of pain is often brushed off as aging. But age doesn't explain everything. Especially when the pain is new, it's been there for more than a few weeks, it keeps getting worse, it's not relieved by rest, heat, or over-the-counter medicine. Ray didn't like to talk about it. He thought pain was private, But one morning, while putting on his socks, he lost his balance, nearly fell, and that scared him more than the pain ever did. His son drove him to the clinic that afternoon. He expected a lecture about stretching or posture, but instead, after a physical exam, the doctor ordered, and what they found was small but serious. A tumor pressing on his bladder and lower colon. The doctor said, "You came in early, Mr. Ray. That makes a big difference." Ray was lucky, but luck had nothing to do with it. Listening did. Pain that stays without a reason is a reason, especially in the lower abdomen, pelvis, scrotum, back or flank. Sometimes it's constant, other times it comes and goes, but if it's changing your movements, limiting your day, or making you hesitate, that matters. Today, Ray can tie his shoes again. He still moves slower than before, but he moves with more intention, and when something doesn't feel right, he doesn't ignore it. He told his grandson just last week, "The body speaks softly at first. If you don't listen, it'll start yelling. I got lucky, I listened while it was still whispering." The line on Diane's nail. A silent thread of warning. Diane had always been proud of her hands. Even at 72, she kept them neat and strong. She didn't go to salons. She didn't wear polish. But every Sunday after church, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a small file and warm bowl of lemon water and tend to her nails, just like her mother had taught her. So when she noticed the thin, dark, vertical line on her left thumbnail, she assumed it was nothing. Maybe I pinched it in a drawer, she thought. It didn't hurt, it wasn't raised, it didn't bleed. But week after week, the line stayed. Then it started to widen. Most people don't associate nails with cancer, but there's a rare and aggressive skin cancer called subungual melanoma, and it often begins right under the nail. It doesn't form a lump, it doesn't itch or peel. It simply draws a line, a thin, dark stripe that looks harmless, until it isn't. This kind of cancer is often mistaken for a bruise, a fungal infection, nail trauma, or simple aging. That's what makes it so dangerous. By the time it's recognized, it's often advanced. But Diane was observant. She noticed that the line wasn't fading. In fact, it seemed to be growing darker, almost uneven, with blurry edges. And one Sunday, as she trimmed her nails, she noticed something new. A little streak of pigment spreading onto the skin just above her nail. That's when she felt a jolt of fear. There's a name for that warning sign. Hutchinson's sign. It's when the dark pigment of subungual melanoma extends beyond the nail bed and touches the skin. It means the cancer is growing, and it's a red flag that should never be ignored. Other signs include a line that's more than 3 millimeters wide, a streak that changes shape or color, splitting or distortion of the nail, bleeding or tenderness without injury. Diane showed it to her daughter, who was a nurse. She took one look and said, "Mom, we're getting this checked out tomorrow." A dermatologist performed a biopsy. It was melanoma, but stage 1. They removed part of the nail and the surrounding tissue. It was painful, yes, but it saved her life. Because she didn't cover it with polish. Because she didn't wait for pain. Because she trusted that a change in the body is a message, not a nuisance. So here's what you need to remember. Your nails are not just decoration. They are indicators. They reflect blood flow, oxygen levels, and even cancer. If you see a dark line that wasn't there before, don't ignore it. Don't assume it's just age. Let a doctor decide. Diane still tends to her nails every Sunday. Only now, she does it with a magnifying glass and a little more reverence. She told her neighbor recently, "That little line didn't just change my nail. It changed how I listen to my body." And that's the real lesson. When the voice fades and the cough won't quit, a sound you shouldn't ignore. Frank had always been the voice in the room, not the loudest, but the warmest. He was the one who led the prayer at Thanksgiving, told the best stories at the church picnic, and sang baritone in the Sunday choir, rich, steady, unmistakable. So when his voice began to change, he noticed. But he didn't say anything. At first, it was just a scratchiness, a dry edge in the back of his throat. Then came the cough, not deep or painful, just there, lingering, constant. He'd clear his throat at dinner, cough once or twice before reading aloud. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. Probably allergies, he told himself. Dry air, maybe. But the weeks passed, and the cough didn't, and his voice, it got weaker. Thinner, raspy, not his. A persistent cough or voice change lasting more than 2 to 3 weeks is one of the most commonly missed warning signs of cancer. Why? Because it's easy to blame on everything else: the weather, acid reflux, old age, a tickle in the throat. But when the cough won't leave, when it stays despite lozenges, tea, or medication, it could be more than irritation. It could be a sign of something serious affecting the lungs, throat, thyroid, vocal cords, or upper airway. In Frank's case, it was the moment he couldn't finish reading his grandson's bedtime story that broke his heart. He'd only made it halfway through Goodnight Moon when his voice gave out completely. He smiled and closed the book, but inside he felt it. Something was wrong. He finally went to his doctor, just to rule things out. They did a laryngoscopy, a simple scope to look at his vocal cords. Then came the CT scan. It turned out Frank had a small tumor growing near his voice box, pressing on the surrounding tissue. It hadn't spread yet, but it had been there, quietly interfering, for months. The good news? It was still treatable. And because Frank spoke up, literally and figuratively, he kept his voice. So here's what you should never ignore: a dry cough that lasts longer than 2 to 3 weeks, a voice that becomes raspy, weak, or strained, a sensation of something stuck in the throat, difficulty swallowing or speaking clearly, coughing up blood, even in small traces. These aren't just symptoms of getting older. They are signals, warnings, opportunities to act. Frank went through treatment. It wasn't easy, but it worked. And months later, he stood back in the church choir, soft and a little shaky, but singing again. His grandson sat in the front pew, clapping for Grandpa Frank. And Frank smiled, not because he sounded like he used to, but because he didn't wait until it was too late. The bruises that came out of nowhere. George didn't remember bumping into anything, but there it was, a large purplish bruise on the inside of his forearm. He rolled down his sleeve and kept going. Maybe he leaned too hard on the doorframe. Maybe he brushed against the counter. At 76, these things happened, right? Except the bruises kept coming. One on his thigh, another near his ribs. And none of them hurt, not at first. They just appeared, like dark watercolor stains on aging paper. He mentioned it to his barber in passing. "You're probably just low on vitamin C," the barber said. George nodded, but something inside him stayed unsettled. Unexplained bruising. Especially on parts of the body that aren't prone to trauma, like the back, stomach, or inner arms, can be one of the early signs of blood cancers, such as leukemia. Why does this happen? Because leukemia affects the bone marrow where blood cells are made. As the disease progresses, your body struggles to produce healthy platelets, the tiny components in your blood that help it clot and stop bleeding. When platelets run low, even the smallest pressure, a handshake, resting your arm on a hard surface, can lead to internal bleeding beneath the skin. The result? Bruises. Lots of them. For no reason. George began paying attention. He kept a little notebook, jotting down where the bruises appeared and how long they lasted. He noticed they lingered longer than before. He also started experiencing occasional nosebleeds and bleeding gums when brushing his teeth. At his next routine checkup, he showed the nurse his notes. She looked at his arm, then his gums. Quietly, she excused herself to bring in the doctor. Within a week, George had a diagnosis: early-stage leukemia. It wasn't the news he wanted, but it was an answer. And that answer gave him options: time, hope. You might think bruises are no big deal, but when they appear frequently, without cause, and in unusual places, they're your body's alarm bell. Other signs to watch for include frequent nosebleeds, bleeding gums, cuts that take longer to heal, tiny red or purple dots on the skin called petechiae. George still keeps that notebook. Only now, most of the pages are filled with gardening notes and reminders to call his sister. The bruises? They've stopped. Because he listened before it was too late. The kind of tired that sleep can't fix, and why it's not your fault. Margaret didn't feel sick. She didn't feel pain. She just felt tired. Not the kind of tired that came after a long day. Not the "I stayed up too late watching TV" tired. This was something else. A heaviness in her arms, a slowness in her legs, like gravity had changed and no one had told her. She was 69 and had always been independent. She walked to the corner market, hung laundry out in the sun, cooked breakfast every morning without fail. But lately, even making toast felt like a task. And getting dressed? Some mornings she sat on the edge of her bed for 10, maybe 15 minutes, just to gather the energy to stand. Her daughter said, "You just need more sleep." So she tried going to bed earlier, then she tried waking later. She drank more water, took vitamins, nothing helped. That's when the guilt started creeping in. Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe this is what getting old feels like. But no, it wasn't laziness. It wasn't age. It was something real. Persistent fatigue, the kind that doesn't go away with rest, is one of the most overlooked early signs of cancer. It's not dramatic. There's no bleeding, no lump, but it drains you slowly, like a quiet leak in the engine. It can signal leukemia, where the bone marrow fails to produce enough healthy blood cells, colon or stomach cancers, which can cause slow internal bleeding, leading to anemia, hormone-related cancers, which disrupt your body's balance and energy regulation. The body is fighting, constantly, silently, and that fight takes energy, even if you're just sitting still. Margaret kept trying to push through, until one day halfway to the mailbox, she had to sit down on the garden bench. Not from pain, not from breathlessness, just pure, unexplainable exhaustion. That moment felt like a wall she couldn't climb, so she finally went to her doctor and said the 4 hardest words: "Something's not right anymore." Blood tests revealed severe anemia, and further tests uncovered the cause, a small but bleeding tumor in her colon. It had been silently sapping her strength for months. But now with a diagnosis, she had something she hadn't had in a long time, a way forward. Here's what fatigue from cancer can feel like: a sense that your limbs are heavier than they should be, feeling winded after small tasks, trouble focusing or remembering things, needing to nap after simple chores, a strange fog that no amount of coffee clears. If this has lasted more than a few weeks, and if you've tried rest, diet, and sleep with no result, it's not you, it's your body asking for help. Margaret is healing now. She still takes breaks. She still moves slower than she used to, but every step she takes now feels like it belongs to her, not to the fatigue that once ruled her day. She no longer whispers, "I'm tired," like it's a confession. Now she says it like it's information. Something worth understanding, not hiding. Because tired doesn't always mean lazy. Sometimes, it means your body is trying to survive something you haven't even seen yet. What you catch early, you don't have to fear later. And why this story was really about you. Linda doesn't take sleeping pills anymore. She used to. Every night for over 3 years, she'd take the same little white tablet, chase it with warm water, and hope that her legs wouldn't cramp, that her chest wouldn't thump, that her mind wouldn't race between shadows and silence. Because even though she fell asleep quickly, she never felt rested. Her nights were filled with tossing, turning, and checking the clock. 2:14 a.m., then 3:21. Then the slow spiral of thoughts: what if this is just how it is now? Linda never told anyone how frightened she really was, because on the outside, she looked fine. But inside, she felt like her body had slowly slipped out of her hands, and no one had noticed. One night, after stumbling across a video like this one, Linda tried something different. Not a new medication. Not a radical change, just a simple fruit bowl for dinner. Half a pear, a few slices of avocado, some papaya with lime, nothing fancy, no expectations. That night, she slept, deep, steady, uninterrupted. And the next night too. Not because of the fruit, but because of something bigger. She had finally started listening. This entire video was never really about cancer. It was about awareness, about noticing what you've been trained to ignore, about remembering that your body isn't betraying you, it's trying to reach you. Whether it's through a tiny bruise, a cough that won't quit, a fatigue you can't explain, or a stripe on your nail that no one else notices. These aren't random. They're messages. And you're still allowed to respond. You're still allowed to ask questions. You're still allowed to choose curiosity over silence. Let's recap what we've learned, not just in facts, but in meaning. Walter woke up to a fast-beating heart and realized aging doesn't explain everything. Linda listened to her fever before it burned her out. Tom trusted the color in his eyes before pain arrived. Uncle Ray admitted that this kind of ache was different. Diane read the story her nail was trying to tell. Frank reclaimed his voice before it was gone for good. George followed his bruises to the truth his blood was hiding. Margaret stopped blaming herself for fatigue and started asking why. They didn't wait for pain. They didn't wait for a crisis. They acted on whispers, not screams. And now it's your turn. You've made it to the end of this video. That means something. It means you care. It means you're still willing to protect yourself. It means you're not done yet. And let me say this clearly. You don't need permission to take yourself seriously. You don't need to be sick to start paying attention. You don't need prescriptions to start making changes. What you need is already inside you. The instinct to notice, the courage to ask, and the grace to treat yourself with the same care you give to everyone else. So here's how we close this together. Type 1 if you've ever woken up because of leg cramps or a racing heartbeat. Type 2 if you've ever felt afraid walking alone in your yard. Type 3 if you're looking for a simple, natural way to take control of your health with no prescriptions needed. Someone out there is quietly reading, hoping they're not alone. Your story might be the reason they seek help. This isn't just a list of symptoms, it's a reminder. You're not powerless, not broken, not invisible. You're still here, still listening, still capable of healing, body and belief.